this lesson, we're going to look at what are polynomials. So a polynomial is a term or a sum of terms in which all variables have whole number exponents and in which variables appear only in the numerator. Well, let's take a look at what terms are. If a polynomial is a term or a sum of terms, then what is a term? Well, a term is a number or a product of a number with one or more variables. Let's look at a couple examples of that. So a term could be something like a number, so the number 10, for example. That is a term. More typically, a term is a product of a number with one or more variables. And the variables can be raised to an exponent. So let's go back and add that in here. With one or more variables, which can be raised to a power. So if we had the number, just the number 10, for example, that's a number. Let's take a look at some examples where we have a number and a variable. So 5y squared, for example, or 1/2 x cubed. Now you'll notice in these examples, our variable y here, this is raised to the power of 2. So this is our variable. And remember that a variable is a letter that represents one or more numbers. So in this example, y is our variable. We've raised it to the power of 2. And then this number 5 here, this is called a coefficient. And this is the number that comes before a variable, so it's multiplied by that variable. In this example here, 1/2 is our coefficient. And our variable is x. And our variable x is raised to the power of 3. Now let's go back to this first term that we created here. This term 10, it's a special term because there is no variable attached to it. And we call that a constant term. There's no variable with that. So that is our constant term. Now, as I said, with a polynomial, the variable must have a whole number exponent. This means that for a polynomial, you cannot have something like 1/2x. This is not a polynomial. It is still a term when we look at algebraic terms, but it's not a term that we can use as part of a polynomial. Now let's look at one other term, so one more example. If we had the term just x squared, for example, and here our variable is x. This is our variable. Our variable is raised to the power of 2. Now it doesn't look like there's a coefficient in front of this term, in front of this variable, but in actual fact the coefficient is 1. We don't typically write it, but it is there. This is our coefficient, the number 1. Now let's look at classifying some polynomials. There's different types of polynomials. There are monomials, binomials, trinomials. So let's take a look at a couple of those. So a monomial, this is a polynomial that has just one term. Just one term. So for example, 3x or 1/2 x squared. Those are examples of monomials. This is just one term. A binomial, this is a polynomial that has exactly two terms. And the terms are added or subtracted together. So for example, 3x plus 7. That is a binomial. So it has two terms. Here we have one term with a variable x and another term that we call our constant term. So another example might be 4a squared minus b. In this example, we have two variables. We have a coefficient of 4 in front of our first variable a, and then we're subtracting another variable b. It is a coefficient of 1, but we never write that 1. Those are binomials. The next one we like to classify is a trinomial. And a trinomial has exactly 3 terms. So an example of that might be 2x squared minus 5x plus 4. This is a trinomial, so it has 3 terms. This first term has a 2 for a coefficient, then a variable of x raised to the power of 2. Then we're subtracting another term with a coefficient of 5 and a variable of x. And then we're adding a constant term of 4. Any polynomial with greater than 3 terms, we just classify under the general term polynomial. While polynomials, the word does describe all polynomials, including monomials, binomials, and trinomials, we use polynomial as a general sense, a general term to describe polynomials with more than 4 terms. Oh, I should say more than 3. 4 or more. So more than 3 terms.